My sister-in-law nearly killed my allergic son with a peanut butter sandwich. She thought his allergy was fake. Now she's being sued, and her own daughter betrayed her by exposing the truth that destroyed the entire family. I'm 32 years old, work from home as a graphic designer, and what happened 6 months ago basically destroyed any possibility of my husband's family ever being what it was. My sister-in-law, Maureen, literally tried to kill my son. And I'm not being dramatic. I mean it literally. She tried to kill him on purpose. And the worst part is it took me years to realize she'd always hated him. I guess I should start at the beginning, when Anthony was born 4 years ago and we found out about his nut allergy. It was terrifying. Because it's not one of those mild allergies where you get a rash or something. No, it's the kind that can kill you in minutes if you don't get to the hospital in time. The allergist told us it was extremely severe, that even minimal contact could trigger a reaction. And from that day on, my life became checking every label, every ingredient, every damn thing that came into our house. Tyler, my husband, is 33 years old and has always been amazing about all this. He's even more paranoid than I am about Anthony's food. We've been married for 7 years and we'd never had serious problems with his family, or at least that's what I thought. His sister Maureen is 40 years old, 8 years older than Tyler, and she was always kind of weird with us, distant, but I thought that was just her personality. She has a daughter, Abigail, who's 5 now, and things between her and her ex-husband Lawrence were always tense, he left her about 3 years ago, because, according to what Tyler told me at the time, she was controlling and manipulative, but I never saw anything concrete, so I didn't get involved in that family drama. The thing is, ever since Anthony was born, Maureen always made weird comments about his allergy. She'd say things like allergies nowadays were exaggerated, that in her day kids ate everything and nothing happened, that kind of comment that makes you roll your eyes but doesn't seem dangerous. You know what I mean? I always reminded her. Hey Maureen, seriously, Anthony can't be around nuts. It's very serious. And she'd nod. But with that face of, yeah, whatever you say. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. I should have paid attention to all those signs. But you never think someone in your own family could hurt your child on purpose. Tyler travels for work twice a month. He goes away for 4 or 5 days. And that day, in March, he was in Chicago, I think. Or maybe Detroit. I don't remember exactly, but he was away. I woke up feeling horrible. I had a fever. My whole body ached. And Anthony was full of energy like a 4-year-old wanting to play, and I could barely get out of bed. I texted my mom, but she was taking care of my grandmother who had just gotten out of the hospital. And I was desperate because I couldn't leave Anthony alone, but I also couldn't take care of him in that state. And then Maureen called me. She literally said, "Hey Michelle, I heard you're sick. Why don't you let me take Anthony to the adventure park with Abigail? That way you can rest and the kids have fun." And I, in my stupidity of being half dead from the flu or whatever I had, thought it was a good idea. I reminded her 3 times about the allergy. I said, "Maureen, please, his EpiPen is in his backpack. He can't eat anything with nuts. Not even things that say they may contain traces. Nothing." And she told me, "Yes, Michelle. I know. I've been hearing it for years. Don't worry." I let them go around 10 in the morning. Anthony was super excited because he loved playing with Abigail. She was always very sweet with him, like a protective older sister. And I went to bed thinking that in a few hours they'd be back and I would have been able to rest. I took medicine and basically passed out in bed. I don't know how much time passed, maybe 2 hours, when my phone started ringing and ringing and ringing. It was Abigail, and she was crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. I sat up in bed and my heart was pounding because I knew something horrible had happened. Abigail was screaming, "Anthony! Anthony is bad! Aunt Michelle! He's swollen and has red spots all over." And I was asking her where they were, what had happened, and she kept crying and saying that her mom had given Anthony a peanut butter sandwich. I literally felt like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on me. I yelled at Abigail to put her mom on the phone now, and Maureen grabbed the phone with this totally casual voice saying, "Oh, Michelle, I think Anthony is having an allergic reaction or something." What do I do? What do I do? I screamed at her. Where the hell were they? That I needed the address now. And she told me they were at her house, that they'd gone there after the park. I hung up, grabbed the car keys, and ran out, still in my pajamas, with a fever and everything, because my baby was having an anaphylactic reaction, and his aunt had just calmly admitted that she'd given him exactly the one thing that could kill him. The drive to her house normally takes like 20 minutes, but I did it in 10. I don't know how I didn't get pulled over or crash because I was crying and shaking and driving like crazy. I got there and knocked on the door like a maniac, and when Maureen opened it, there was my baby on the couch, his little face all swollen, his lips huge, red hives all over his body, breathing with difficulty, and Abigail was sitting next to him crying and holding his hand. I grabbed Anthony, looked for the EpiPen in his backpack, which thank God was still there, injected it into his thigh while telling him everything was going to be okay, that Mommy was there, and then I ran out with him in my arms to the car. Abigail followed me screaming, Aunt Michelle, I'm coming too, don't leave me with my mommy, and something in her voice made me stop. I put her in the car too and drove to the nearest hospital, which is about 10 minutes from Maureen's house. The whole way Anthony was breathing weird, like wheezing. And I kept talking to him, telling him to hang on, that we were almost there. And Abigail in the back seat was crying and saying over and over, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I tried to stop her, but I couldn't. We got to the emergency room and I ran in with Anthony. The doctors attended to him immediately, gave him oxygen, more epinephrine, antihistamines. Everything happened so fast it was like being in a nightmare. They made me leave the room and I stood there shaking, still with a fever, and Abigail grabbed onto my waist crying. I asked her, with the calmest voice I could, what happened exactly, sweetie? And she told me between sobs that after the park they went to her mommy's house, that her mommy made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and that Anthony said, I can't eat that, I have an allergy, and her mommy told him that was nonsense, that those allergies didn't exist, that I was making him a weak child. Can? You believe it? My sister-in-law literally told my 4-year-old son that his allergy that could kill him was made up. And then, according to Abigail, when Anthony refused to eat the sandwich, Maureen grabbed him, took the sandwich, and forced it into his mouth while he cried and tried to spit it out. Abigail said she yelled at her mom to stop, that Anthony really did have an allergy, but Maureen ignored her and kept shoving the sandwich in his mouth until Anthony swallowed it. My 4-year-old baby was forced to eat the only food that could kill him by an adult who knew perfectly well what she was doing. I was processing this when Maureen arrived at the hospital, all calm, and asked me how Anthony was like nothing had happened. Something in me broke. I walked up to her and slapped her, hard, and yelled at her how dare she, that she'd almost killed my son, and she had the nerve to tell me I was exaggerating, that it was just a sandwich, that kids nowadays were too pampered. A doctor had to separate me from her because I was about to hit her again. Abigail ran to me and hid behind my legs, trembling, and when Maureen tried to approach her, Abigail screamed, No, I don't want to go with you. You hurt Anthony. You're mean. The nurse took Abigail and me to a private room while they treated Anthony. I called Tyler. It was like 3 in the afternoon where he was, and when I told him what had happened, he said he was taking the first flight back, that he'd arrive at night. Then I called my in-laws, Tyler's parents, and explained the situation to them. At first, they didn't believe me. Like my mother-in-law said it must have been an accident, that Maureen would never do something like that. But when I told her that Abigail had seen everything and that Maureen had admitted to giving him the sandwich, they went quiet. I asked them to come to the hospital, but they said they first wanted to talk to Maureen to hear her version, and that hurt me. I'm not going to lie, because what version could there be of almost killing your grandson? Anthony was under observation for like 5 hours. The doctors said that if he'd arrived 10 minutes later, we probably wouldn't have made it. 10 minutes. My son was 10 minutes away from dying because his aunt decided that allergies are made up. When they finally let me in to see him, he was asleep from the medications, still with hives but breathing normally, and I sat next to him and cried like I hadn't cried in years. Abigail sat in a chair next to me and said, Aunt Michelle, I called fast, right? I saved Anthony, right? And I hugged her and told her yes, that she was a hero, that she had saved her cousin. We left the hospital around 9 at night. Anthony was already awake and better. The doctors gave us follow-up instructions and more backup EpiPens. Maureen had left the hospital hours before. I don't know exactly when. I took Anthony and Abigail to a diner near the hospital because none of us had eaten anything all day. And there, while we were eating, Abigail told me everything in more detail. She told me that her mommy had made the sandwiches in the kitchen, that she had told her mommy, Anthony can't eat peanut butter, Aunt Michelle always says so. And that her mommy responded that I was a paranoid person who invented illnesses. Then, when they put the sandwiches in front of them, Anthony politely said, "No thank you, I can't eat it." And Maureen got up, walked toward him, grabbed the sandwich and literally shoved it in his mouth while he cried and tried to get away. Abigail said that her mommy held Anthony by the arms with one hand and with the other shoved the sandwich in his mouth, and that Anthony was crying and coughing but Maureen wouldn't stop. When she finally let him go, Anthony ran to the bathroom to wash his mouth and spit it out, and minutes later, he started feeling sick. Abigail told me she ran to get her mommy's phone and called me because she knew it was an emergency, and that her mommy yelled at her that she was being dramatic, but when she saw how swollen Anthony was, she got nervous and answered my call. While Abigail was telling me all this, my 4-year-old baby was eating his chicken nuggets in silence with his face still a little swollen, and I felt a fury I had never felt in my life. Tyler arrived at the diner around 11 at night. He took an emergency flight and drove straight from the airport when he saw Anthony with the hives and swelling, his eyes filled with tears. He hugged our son and then Abigail and asked me where Maureen was. I told him I didn't know and I didn't care, that all I cared about was keeping our children away from that woman forever. That night, Abigail slept at our house, in the guest room, because she didn't want to go back to her mom, and I wasn't going to send her back to someone who had just proven capable of hurting a child. The next day, early, Lawrence, Maureen's ex-husband and Abigail's dad, came to our house. He's like 42, 2 years old, I think. He's a lawyer, and I always liked him. The few times I saw him, he told me that Maureen had called him crying, saying that I had taken his daughter away, and that he wanted to know what had really happened. We told him everything. Abigail also told him her version, and Lawrence went pale. He told me that he had always suspected that Maureen had control and anger issues, but that he never thought she would go so far as to hurt a child. Then he took out his phone, played an audio on speaker, and it was Maureen talking to him the night before. In the recording, Maureen admitted everything. She said she had given the peanut butter sandwich to Anthony because she was tired of me treating my son like he was made of glass. And this was the most disturbing part, she said she didn't care if Anthony had had a reaction because she didn't have money to pay for the hospital anyway, and that it was my problem, not hers. Lawrence told us he had secretly recorded the conversation because he needed evidence for custody of Abigail, and that now he wanted to call CPS, Child Protective Services, because Abigail wasn't safe with her mother. Tyler and I completely agreed. We called CPS and reported everything. The social worker who helped us said they would send someone to investigate, and we provided the hospital medical records, Abigail's statement, and Lawrence's recording. We also filed a report with the police for endangering a minor. I don't know exactly what the charge is called, but basically for what Maureen did to Anthony. 2 days later, Maureen sent me a text message. I was expecting an apology, maybe, or at least some kind of explanation. But no. The message said something like it was my fault for exaggerating about Anthony's allergy, that I had made all this drama unnecessarily. And then, at the end, she wrote something that froze my blood. I should have killed him when I had the chance. Then I wouldn't have to deal with your drama. I took a screenshot immediately and sent it to the police and the CPS social worker. How can you write something like that about a 4-year-old child? About your nephew? That confirmed for me that Maureen knew exactly what she was doing, that it wasn't an accident or a moment of bad judgment. It was intentional. Tyler's parents, my in-laws, finally came to see us about a week after everything. At first, my mother-in-law still had doubts. She said things like, maybe Maureen didn't understand the severity of the allergy, that maybe it was an honest mistake, and I was about to explode when Tyler played the audio that Lawrence had shared with us. They listened to their daughter, to Maureen, admit everything with that cold and calculating voice, saying she didn't care if Anthony had almost died, and I saw my mother-in-law's face change color. My father-in-law didn't say anything. He just stood up and went out to the yard, and when he came back, his eyes were red. They apologized for not believing us immediately, said they never thought Maureen was capable of something like that, and my mother-in-law cried, saying she didn't know what had happened to her daughter. CPS worked fast. I guess because we had solid evidence, and because Abigail herself confirmed everything that had happened. They did interviews, reviewed Maureen's history, and discovered that Lawrence had been fighting for full custody for months because Maureen was emotionally abusive with Abigail. There were records from school therapists where Abigail had mentioned that her mom yelled at her a lot and punished her for small things. In the end, about 2 months after the incident, CPS removed Abigail from Maureen's custody permanently. Abigail went to live with Lawrence full-time, and Maureen has supervised visits like once a month, but Abigail doesn't even want to see her. The last time Lawrence tried to take her to one of those supervised visits, Abigail had such a severe panic attack that the supervisor canceled the visit and recommended that Maureen not have contact with her daughter until Abigail is ready, if she ever is. It also came to light that Maureen had been using the child support money that Lawrence gave her for Abigail on other things, like she'd go on trips with friends or buy expensive clothes for herself, while Abigail wore old clothes and sometimes went to school without proper lunch. Lawrence was furious when he found out. He filed more charges, and now Maureen has to pay restitution and is being investigated for misuse of child support funds or something like that. And her whole life fell apart, basically. And I don't feel even a little bit of sympathy, because she almost killed my son out of pure spite. Anthony was in therapy for like 3 months after the incident. He had nightmares where someone was shoving food in his mouth and he couldn't breathe, and the therapist said it was trauma from what Maureen did to him. It breaks my heart because my baby had never been afraid of eating until that, and now sometimes he checks his food 2 or 3 times before trying it, even when it's something I prepare for him. The therapist says he's improving, that children are resilient, but I still see the fear in his eyes sometimes, and I want to find Maureen and, well, better not finish that sentence. Abigail is also in therapy. She has nightmares where she doesn't get there in time to save Anthony, or where her mom hurts other children. It breaks my soul because she's a hero. She literally saved my son's life, but she feels guilty for not being able to physically stop her mom. We've told her 1,000 times that she's a child, that it wasn't her responsibility, that she did exactly the right thing by calling me, but the therapist says the feeling of guilt is normal in these cases. Lawrence is an incredible dad, like he's really making an effort to give her stability and love, and we see Abigail often. Almost every weekend she comes to play with Anthony, and sometimes they have sleepovers. Tyler's family is divided. My father-in-law is completely on our side. He says Maureen must face the consequences of her actions and that he's not going to have contact with her until she acknowledges what she did and seeks serious help. But my mother-in-law, although she understands that what Maureen did is wrong, still feels sorry for her. Like a month ago, my mother-in-law commented that Maureen was going through a very difficult time, that she had lost her daughter and her job, yes. They also fired her when her boss found out about the whole legal matter, and that maybe we should consider giving her another chance to at least see Anthony under supervision. Tyler exploded. He told his mom that if she kept defending Maureen, we were going to have to limit contact with her too, and that we weren't going to expose Anthony to someone who sympathizes with the person who almost killed him. That caused a huge drama. My mother-in-law cried, said she was just trying to keep the family together. But Tyler was firm. He told her that Maureen destroyed the family when she decided to force an allergic child to eat the food that can kill him, and that the consequences of that are non-negotiable. My father-in-law supported Tyler, and now my mother-in-law is resentful, but at least she doesn't mention Maureen in front of us anymore. I know she visits her sometimes, like she goes to her apartment and brings her food and things, and that bothers me, but I can't control what she does. I can only control the access she has to my children. 3 weeks ago, something happened that scared us a lot. Maureen showed up at Anthony's school and tried to take him. The teacher, thank God, knew that Maureen wasn't authorized to pick him up because we had informed the school of the whole situation, and when Maureen insisted, the teacher called security and the police. Maureen yelled that she had a right to see her nephew, that we had brainwashed everyone, and that Anthony was perfectly fine, so clearly his allergy wasn't that serious. The police escorted her out of the school and were in the process of getting a formal restraining order. Our lawyer says that with the history we already have and this new incident, it's very likely they'll approve it. Anthony is almost 5 years old now. He's turning 5 next month. He's better. He's still with his therapist, but the nightmares are less frequent, and he went back to being the happy and curious kid he always was, more or less. He's still very careful with food and always asks me, "Are you sure, Mommy, that it doesn't have nuts?" But his therapist says that's actually a good development, that he's learning to protect himself. Abigail is coming to his birthday party next month. In fact, she's helping me plan it. She wants it to be superhero-themed because she says Anthony is her favorite superhero, which is ironic because she was the one who saved him. I haven't spoken to Maureen again since the day, at the hospital when I slapped her. She's tried to contact me through social media, creating fake accounts because I blocked her everywhere, sending messages that range from pleas for forgiveness to veiled threats. We screenshot everything and pass it to our lawyer. The last time she tried to contact me was like 2 weeks ago. She sent me a long message saying that all this was my fault. That if I hadn't been so overprotective with Anthony, he wouldn't have had that reaction. That allergies are overcome with gradual exposure. All that nonsense that people without medical education make up. I didn't respond. I just archived the message for the restraining order. Tyler and I are more united than ever. Honestly, going through something like this either destroys you as a couple or makes you stronger, and we decided to be stronger. He left the job that required so much travel and now works from home most of the time. He says he wants to be here to protect his family. And I completely understand. It took us months to feel safe leaving Anthony with anyone other than us or my parents. Like not even with a babysitter. And it's still hard, but we're getting better. My in-laws come to dinner about once a month. My father-in-law plays with Anthony and reads him stories, and my mother-in-law is trying to make peace, although I know deep down she still feels we're too hard on Maureen. Recently, my mother-in-law mentioned that Maureen was in therapy now, seeking help, and I just nodded without saying anything because, honestly, I don't care. Let her seek all the help she wants. That doesn't change what she did, and that doesn't mean she's going to have access to my son again. Tyler says his mom has to process the grief of losing her daughter, not physically, but the relationship they had, and that it's going to take time. And I understand, but I also can't be the one to help her with that, not when she almost lost her grandson because of that same daughter. Last week, Anthony asked, "Tell me why we don't see Aunt Maureen anymore." I had told him that Aunt Maureen had made a very big mistake, and that's why we couldn't see her. But he insisted on knowing what kind of mistake. Tyler and I looked at each other and decided to tell him a softened version of the truth, that Aunt Maureen had given him food that made him very sick, that she did it on purpose because she didn't believe his allergy was real, and that's why she couldn't be around him. Anthony thought for a moment and then said, "But Abby saved me, right, Mommy?" And I told him yes, that his cousin was very brave and saved him. He smiled and said, "Then it's okay. I don't need to see Aunt Maureen. I just want to be with the people who really love me." And that basically sums it all up, I guess. I don't know what's going to happen with Maureen long term. I know she has pending criminal charges for endangering a minor, and our lawyer says she'll probably get probation and community service or maybe even jail time, depending on how the judge interprets the intentionality of her actions. There's enough evidence that she knew about the allergy, multiple testimonies that she'd been warned, the recording where she admits she knew and didn't care, and the text message where she literally says she should have killed him when she had the chance. So yeah, I think she's going to face real consequences. Finally. What hurts me most, looking back, is that I trusted her. I left my son with her thinking that, despite her weird comments, she would never hurt him because she was family. And that's the hardest part to process, that someone in your own family could hate your child so much that she's willing to put him in mortal danger just to prove a point. Anthony's therapist says Maureen probably has deep psychological problems, maybe narcissism or some personality disorder, but honestly, I don't care about her diagnoses. All I care about is that my son is alive, that Abigail is safe with her dad, and that I'm never going to allow someone like that near my family again. Abigail is coming tomorrow to spend the weekend. We're going to make cookies, without nuts, obviously, and watch movies. She and Anthony are closer than ever, and it's beautiful but also sad because their bond was strengthened through a trauma that neither of them should have experienced. Sometimes I see her playing with Anthony, and I notice how she constantly checks that he's okay, that he's eating safe things, and I know she still carries that weight of feeling like she has to protect him. Lawrence says her therapist is working on that, helping her understand it's not her responsibility, but it's going to take time. Children are resilient, yes, but the scars Maureen left them won't disappear soon.